Let's unpack some of these trends in the report with Research Director at Trend ER Infoquest. That's Mogorosi Mashilo, live to us via our video link this morning. And it's great to have you on the program. Thanks so much indeed for making time to speak to us. It's really interesting to see what you found through your research, especially when we consider the trying times, let's say, that we've had as a global community, really, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's begin by just tracking whether or not we're back to those levels at which people were traveling before we were hit by this pandemic.
Thank you, Ayanda. Thank you for having me. Yes, it's quite very interesting to see, the difference between this year and over the last 2 years, because the last 2 years people have seen a lot of lockdowns and they haven't had a chance to be able to travel. And what we've unpacked and uncovered now is that 4 in 5 South African, which is 74% of those of our research sample, are traveling this festive season. So it does really show that there's a pickup, and it does really show that people are ready and have been wanting to go out, especially into the fresh air nowadays.
Oh dear, Mogorosi, it seems like our line to you is becoming faulty. Hopefully it stays with us. I'm glad you mentioned this idea of your research sample, because that's going to be my next question. It's important, of course, which South Africans, as once infamously asked, you're actually looking at here.
Correct. So we did a sample of 300 respondents, and this is a representative of the South African population. So our quota sample does take into consideration and does cover the South African majority. So when extrapolated, it can really give us the answers to say that this does represent South Africans that are traveling. So we do take from age groups of age 18 all the way to 60 in all income brackets. So really a representation of the South African population.
Sure. All right. Let's delve into the findings then of the research itself. So we've got on the graph there the incidence of traveling, and I suppose it answers the questions of those who are able to travel. How many of them are actually leaving the country and how many are staying? Interestingly enough, it seems these campaigns for people to explore the country are having some kind of effect. 49% of people who can get out of their houses are choosing to stay in the country.
That's very true, and it's very positive to see that our South Africans are also willing to travel locally and are starting to realize that even traveling home for the Christmas season, you can still visit a B&B next to your ekaya where you are. So really it does really give a good impression that South Africans are really embracing more and more of traveling and exploring South Africa as a whole. And as you said, 49 say that they are going to explore the country.
Yeah. And of those people, I mean, they obviously prefer different types of holidays. You could either be at the beach, you could have some kind of bush experience, and no surprises once again. Most people, more than half, in fact, of those you surveyed, preferring to be at the beach. I wonder whether or not the state, for instance, of Durban's beaches have affected this in any way.
That's a very interesting question, Ayanda, because out of the top 3 provinces where people want to travel to, firstly is KZN, followed by the Western Cape, and then Mpumalanga. So when you look at that, as you mentioned, 57 of those, over half of those, they want to really go out to the sea. And this has been quite an interesting approach for us, because we really want to go back in January, back to our same respondents to see how the uptake and whether they did reconsider or did really, in fact, go on to go to KZN. So we will be following up with the second wave of the study to see how much people have reconsidered, considering what is happening in Durban's beaches right now. But people from our research still prefer Durban as the the most attractive place to be this December.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's the dynamic within our borders, right? Of those who are choosing to leave the country, are you finding that they're staying in the southern hemisphere, because that's where we're having our summer, or are there those among us who dare to go to the north given the winter they're having?
Again, I think looking at these statistics gives us a very nice outlook of how not only as South Africans but as Africans have started to embrace our continent as well. So, almost half again are looking into going into Africa and visiting those African countries, which is really positive for the continent. And then secondly, it's followed by the UK, but this is a very small, this is a big margin where you're looking at 46% of people traveling outside going in, visiting African countries, and then only 29 of those saying they'd like to go to the UK. And as you know, Africa is still very much a tropical continent, and it's very still sunny and enjoying the summer African skies. So not a lot of people will be seeing much cold traveling. And out of all those traveling abroad, usually we found out it's mostly the younger generation, so they're 34 years and younger. And this is mainly driven because of the cost effectiveness of it. When you're younger, you don't have a family as big, you don't have to consider a lot of people traveling with you, so it does become cost effective for the younger generation to travel abroad.
It's fascinating to hear that. What is equally interesting is seeing the kind of accommodation that people typically opt for, and no surprises. Most, in fact, just over a third of your respondents choosing to stay with family and friends. I'm tempted to ask whether you ask them whether or not there's any correlation with the kind of conflict that they typically endure during the holidays.
That's very interesting. But again, Ayanda, we also have to remember that people are still recovering from COVID, the pandemic, and obviously the spending will not be as big as it was 4 years ago, for example. So staying with family and friends really does give them a bit of leeway in terms of spending. It allows them to still travel, but it also gives them an alternative to travel at a much more cost-effective way. And just to add to that, also another third say they'll be staying at guest B&Bs and apartments, which means the likes of your new accommodation offers, such as your offerings where people are now offering their apartments as holiday destinations, Airbnb and so forth. And those have come into play a very big role where people are finding this much more effective to be able to stay in someone else's place than go to a hotel. So as much as, they're still traveling and we got this big wave of new travelers, they still are cognizant of the costs and are still trying to make it as cost effective as possible.
Yeah. Looking at this data has been incredibly interesting, just, I guess, as a matter of telling a story. But I imagine it's also a great way of trying to kind of guide those who are in charge of curating the tourism experience in this country. As we suspected, there are many people in South Africa who are interested to explore this country, but many of them have pointed to how unaffordable it feels like it is to do that.
Yes. And also looking at the provinces as well, I think it also gives an indication to, the tourism boards and the tourism sector to see which provinces are performing better and to see which ones are not performing, so that they can put and implement more attractive means for people to be able to enjoy the country as a whole.
All right, Mogorosi, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Really interesting findings from your research. I look forward to your engaging some of your respondents post this holiday period to see how many of those plans actually materialize. Mogorosi Mashilo is the research director with Trend ER and Infoquest. Once again, thanks very much indeed for your time.